Hello, and welcome to Streamers and Punches, the podcast from Sound Notion TV that looks at current events and new releases in the world of film music. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
And on today's show, we're going to look at the Oscar nominations. A lot of buzz going around about who got nominated and who got snubbed. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm also going to look at a couple other articles, of course, connected to other holiday movies, some nominated, some not. And we're going to talk a little bit about some things that we listened to this week and look at a movie whose score we haven't even talked about at all. So let's start off with the Oscar nominations. In case you haven't read this week, they've been posted everywhere. So I will read the 5 nominations for Best Score right down the line. The Adventures of Tintin, of course, by John Williams. The Artist, by Ludovic Bourse. Hugo, by Howard Shore. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, by Alberto Iglesias. And Warhorse by John Williams. So I do want to talk a couple thoughts about these nominations. I do want to open this up for me and Kevin to discuss a little bit. So these titles are ones we've referred to several times throughout our last couple months of episodes for Streamers and Punches. Yeah. Kevin, any thoughts about what got left out or your feelings about what got included?
Yeah, I guess it seems like, all of these film music articles that have been popping up on the internet this week are all about who has gotten snubbed and how the Academy has gotten it wrong. And it seems like that is always the argument around this time of year. Yeah. I mean, Howard Shore scored Hugo. It was a very good score, and it's been getting a lot of hype since it came out, of course. The John Williams scores, I mean, they're good. They're not his best, and certainly the films aren't the greatest. But I feel like that those were nominated long before that music was even recorded. I mean, it's been several years since he's done anything. They're both Steven Spielberg movies.
From the award-winning producers of the Oscar Digital.
Interrupting me. I mean, they were kind of going to be there. The Artist by Ludovic Bourse won the Golden Globe. That's kind of not surprising. A lot of people have been complaining that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, their score to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was not nominated. I don't know. It's that one doesn't bother me quite so much. And it seems like in general that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was mostly left off the Oscars this year anyway. I wonder how much that had to do with it. I don't know. Are there any you think are missing or on there unfairly, if you will, Bill?
Not necessarily. I mean, John Williams seems to get nominated about every time he's got the score out. I don't think he has to have 2 there. I'm not sure which one of his I'd pick because I kind of liked Warhorse a little bit better than Tintin. But as far as sort of being very predictable or treading familiar territory, they both kind of do that. So I think one Williams is plenty. The Artist I've heard a little bit of. We played a little bit on a previous episode. I'd have to listen to the whole thing to give a really good opinion. I think Hugo is there properly. And as I've said before, I really liked Rango. I really like Hannah. I probably think of those two. Hannah maybe missed out on something. I think Hannah could have been nominated. It's interesting because Dave, our producer, showed me an article in the New Yorker, and we'll put the link on our website. But it's called The Best Snub Soundtracks, and it's a little bit of an agenda article because, of course, since Trent Reznor was nominated last year for The Social Network, since he scored that film for David Fincher, I guess everyone just assumed that he was going to get nominated again for scoring The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And he did not, which I actually kind of found humorous because I wasn't really particularly...
That was another one, kind of like the Williams scores, where you hear, okay, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, they won the Oscar last year. They're scoring another David Fincher film this year. That's kind of another nomination that you expect before that project is even done, just like the John Williams one. So yeah, I think it's the same kind of thing. It's you were expecting it, and it's therefore when it doesn't happen, it's somehow outrageous. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's outrageous. I think it is interesting because 20 years ago, I don't think you would have nearly the variety that you have now. and maybe that's worth some kind of celebrating, I suppose. But I just can't imagine a score that's mostly textural and sound layers and a Led Zeppelin cover. And that's basically what The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is. And I thought the movie was very good, and I thought the score was appropriate, but there was nothing memorable about it. So it's the sort of score that we talked about many times with the new trend of completely being connected to the film and being nothing when you remove it from the film, which is the first job that a score should, the first duty that a score should fulfill. And it does that, but it doesn't do anything else other than that. I mean, if you played it at a party, that'd be a real downer and everyone would leave because it's really downer music to accompany a depressing, almost black and white movie. So 20 years ago, a score like that I don't think would ever have been nominated. I mean, an astute listener can correct me, but you had musicals, you had, of course, John Williams, you had Danny Elfman, you had Alan Silvestri, James Horner scores. I mean, all those composers were populating the movie houses with their films. And then now you have a complete different dichotomy, or rather a complete different assortment. So it's interesting. It's interesting for sure.
And it's not to say that a score with that kind of approach, this kind of ambient electronic thing, it's not to say that that type of writing can't work well for the film and that, you know, automatically it's going to suck. That's not the case at all. I think it can work well. But simply because that's kind of the new thing, and John Williams and that sort of score is the old thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that the new thing should get the nomination. You know what I mean? If it doesn't work well for the film, then it doesn't work well for the film. And I think that's what it has to come down to.
What about the score to Drive, Cliff Martinez, that's mentioned in that article?
You're right. Our producer is pointing out the article. The New York Times, the New Yorker article points out not only was the disappointment from not having the Trent Reznor score nominated, but also the Cliff Martinez Drive score was not nominated, and that I need to listen to all the way. And I still want to see Drive. I missed it in the theaters, and I want to check it out when it comes out on DVD.
That was a score that several people we've interviewed, I think both Lucas Kendall and Daniel Schweiger at least, have cited that score as being, you know, kind of a really excellent score. So that is probably one that is maybe surprising, that, you know, when around the time the film came out, that score got a lot of attention, but hasn't seemed to translate this year, I guess.
Yeah, I'd almost be okay if one of the Williams nominations was not there and maybe Drive went in its place. But I have no problem that Trent Reznor did not get nominated. I won't lose any sleep over that. And I think that if Williams comes out with a movie just because of his brand name alone, he'll probably get the nomination. And if Hans Zimmer would have stayed in, he probably would be up there as well. For I don't know what. I mean, he had several movies this past year. Yeah. So an interesting assortment to be sure. Definitely older style against the modern day style, and then a few in between. And then the artist, of course, is a throwback to even before Williams, older Williams style. So
that's in terms of style, that one's the oldest on the list without question.
Yeah. And then Hugo, of course, is like 1920s Paris, so it's got kind of an old Hollywood style too, but very interesting. And as we'll hear later, we've got an excerpt for the Alberto Iglesias score for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. That's a very modern approach without being sound textures and layers and ambient drones. So interesting combination. There was moving on. There was another article that is basically just comparing John Williams' approach in scoring Warhorse to the musical style of Ralph Vaughan Williams, who's a very famous British composer from the early 20th century, sort of a contemporary of Benjamin Britten and Gustav Holst, who wrote The Planets, which is should be on the recent playlist of any film music fanatic, if it isn't already.
Should be on the permanent playlist of any film music fanatic.
Yeah, so he's a contemporary of those British composers. It was an interesting article. It sort of discredits the Williams score by saying that it's essentially not as high quality as a lot of people are heaping praise on it. I can't disagree with those comments because I don't think it's Williams' most inspired score. He hasn't written in a while, and usually when he writes for Spielberg, it's usually better than when he writes for just a standalone movie like The Patriot or Far and Away.
Yeah, when he usually writes for Spielberg, the movie's usually better too.
Well, exactly, and those have gotten bad. So there's a little cause for concern among Williams fans, I suppose. But anyway, that article will be linked to our website as well. Now, moving on, but connected to the Oscar nominations, we didn't mention anything about songs, and this was an interesting grouping of nominations because in the song category there were only 2, and there were 5 movies nominated, which we already named. But the 2 songs, which one was Man or Muppet, which comes from the Muppets, and the other was Real in Rio from the movie Rio, the computer animated bird film Rio. Both were nominated for Best Song, and that's it. So yeah. It's a little bit unusual. This could normally be a category with 4 or 5 songs easily, and probably from some really familiar people. Right off the bat, Dave, could you show that graphic again real quick? So we've got Brett McKenzie for Man or Muppet, and he's of course one of the Flight of the Conchords singer-songwriters. So he's at least somewhat well known. What about Real in Rio? I can't read it from right here. Sergio Mendes, that's right. Okay. So both are well-known names, but I would say no one's like a huge name like in the past, where you've had a song by Madonna or you've had a song by Elton John, right. Or people like Alan Newman. What's that?
No Randy Newman with a Pixar song.
Well, see, that's interesting. They could have had Toy Story 3 could have been in there for one of the songs, or they could have had the Captain America song that Alan Menken wrote. Yeah, the Star Spangled Man. I mean, that was a big one. That stopped.
I wonder, with only 2 songs getting nominations, I wonder if it was a matter of so many of the other potential songs kind of canceling each other out or something. I don't know. Despite
Toy Story 3 is also not nominated for Best Animated Feature, so I'm not sure that it.
I think
it may have been in a previous year.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah.
Say what you want about all the songs missing from this category, and it's strange that there's only 2 and all that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, Man or Muppet from the Muppets, not only was the film fantastic, that song was amazing. And part of the thing that made the song really fantastic was kind of how it fits in the film, and there are one really funny cameo and all this kind of stuff. So despite all the ones that are missing, I think that one absolutely deserves to be there, and I hope that one wins.
For fans of the Big Bang Theory,
yeah, exactly.
They'll enjoy that montage from the movie. Now, speaking of the Muppets, though, I actually like the Life as a Happy Song. I thought that was more of the actual song of the film, because the way they reprise it at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
And it stuck with me for that reason. It stuck with me a lot more. And I thought that was kind of the song from that movie that seemed to be the one to nominate, or the one to really walk home with, if anything were to win an award. So yeah. Kind of surprised that that wasn't the nominated one. And the more of the melancholy, emotionally conflicted song from halfway through the film was the one nominated instead. So very interesting.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Scorekeeper is a guy who writes at Ain't It Cool News, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have visited that website at least maybe once, hopefully. AintItCool.com is a website very well known for movie news and previews and commentary and reviews. And they have a writer or contributor who calls himself Scorekeeper. And from time to time, this person highlights new releases, new things that have come out, and so on and so forth. So he lists his top 10 scores for 2011, and we've got a link there. Obviously, I'm not going to take the time to go into all those, but Hannah is on there, so I'll give a shout out to one of the scores I enjoyed.
We also got Alan Silvestri's score to Captain America, which I've been talking about frequently, I think, since we saw that movie back in July or whatever the case was. So.
Yeah.
Certainly one of my favorites from the past year.
Yep. And the next thing I want to mention is this is actually connected to Hugo. Mm-hmm. There is a French duo, and this was recently on NPR, and again, the link to this is on our website. There's a French duo called Air, and they are scoring, or have already scored, a sort of a new print that was found of Georges Méliès's Trip to the Moon, which, if you recall from the film Hugo, is the famous iconic image of the man who flies in the rocket ship and lands in sort of the eye of the moon, and the moon looks a little bit disgruntled because the rocket ship landed there. Anyway, there was a color print of it that was found, and these two gentlemen worked together on the score. And so they have a nice 10-minute long interview during All Things Considered, and you can check it out through the link. And they just described a sort of a non-traditional approach and what it's like to come to a film 100 years after it was created and then contribute the music to it. So a very interesting project, and definitely something cool to check out and out of the norm from Hollywood and its film scores. And finally, the movie The Gray just came out this past weekend, and the score is composed by Mark, I think it's Streitenfeld is how you probably pronounce his last name. Streitenfeld. I'm not an expert, but he's Bavarian, so I hope he cuts me a little bit of slack. But his score to The Gray,
supposed to be an umlaut in there somewhere. I don't know.
Streitenfeld.
Yeah.
Streitenfeld. So Mark Streitenfeld composed the score to the film The Gray. This is the film with Liam Neeson, directed by Joe Carnahan. And I'm going to talk about it in just a little bit of my own experience listening to it. But the article was written by Alison Loring, and she runs a blog. It's basically about sound and film production. And I was checking out some of her other articles, and she doesn't normally write about film music. So something in the score reached out and sort of touched her, and she found it interesting enough to give a mention to, and why a movie that takes place in Alaska won't leave you cold, as far as the score is concerned anyway. So it's kind of an interesting article, and head over and check that out. And if you haven't seen the movie, see it, but do not watch the trailer before you see it, and you'll probably be infinitely more satisfied with the outcome. That's probably the best thing I can say going into that. So anyway, Kevin, anything else you want to add?
No, I think in terms of the headlines, I think I'm all set. You mentioned just a second ago, Bill, that you've been listening to this score from the Gray. I have not seen this. Did you actually go see the movie? I know it came out this weekend.
Yes, I did.
And how was it? How was the score?
I didn't realize you were asking me to then comment on it.
Well, it's what we talked about.
Yes. It's very delicately scored, some strings, some piano, very light, very subtle, but it does have a couple motives that recur and sort of circulate throughout the score. Not anything huge. I mean, certainly it's very delicate. It's just very subtly handled, but it kind of goes along with the movie, and in its subtlety and its restraint. I'll say that. And I thought it was very effective. And again, I don't really know that I would run out and buy it and listen to it, but if I was gonna run like a massage parlor or something like that, and I wanted some really mellow music in the back that does not make a lot of demands on your ears, I could get it, and it would probably work just great in that environment. So anyway, but a very effective score and very tasteful, very delicately orchestrated, and I did like it, and the movie was quite good. I'm still thinking about parts from that movie. It resonated quite a bit, and it had a lot of impact, and I really dug it. So go see The Gray if you can, and it'll make you think.
All right, interesting.
Yeah. What about you, Kevin?
This week I had a very interesting and unusual film and music experience. Instead of going to the theater to see just kind of any old movie, I actually went to a concert where this was a concert by the Hamburg Symphony coming to town, playing in Ann Arbor here. They played a piece by Olivier Messiaen called From the Canyon to the Stars. This was a piece that Messiaen wrote in the 70s, early 70s, to mark the occasion of the American bicentennial. And it's a concert piece for like a kind of a small orchestra, not quite small enough to be a chamber orchestra, but small orchestra with piano solo, It's like 12 movements. It's about an hour and a half long. And like a lot of Messiaen's music, it has a lot to do with the sounds of nature and things like that. And it's very much inspired by the Grand Canyon and the large American landscapes and all this kind of stuff. But for this particular occasion, there was a film created to accompany this music. There's a film created by Israeli filmmaker Daniel Landau, and it was horrible. It was the worst thing I've ever seen.
The film or the whole thing together?
Well, the performance of the music was okay. It was fairly a good performance, although I had not listened to the piece before I went to this concert, and I definitely got the sense that there were several awkward pauses in the concert where there's, for example, there's one movement with lots of French horn solos where there'd be a phrase of the solo, and then the soloist would just wait there for a few seconds and then play the next solo. So I got the sense that there were a lot of pauses and breaks inserted into the piece to help it maybe line up with the film better, although there was no click track, there was no headphones, there was no deliberate synchronization. So the performance of the music was okay, but the film was so bad, and the marriage of the film and the music was so terrible that it was really hard just to try and tune that stuff out to at least enjoy the music. I don't
sounded
really know.
Like maybe you just need to put some Vertigo music in there.
Maybe if you put that cue from Vertigo in there for the whole hour and a half, that the film would be a lot better. But probably because Messiaen is a good composer, just like Bernard Herrmann, and there was, I was expecting some kind of synchronization between the conductor and the film, and if there wasn't any, that was cool. It would still be interesting to see how the things fit together. But aside from occurring simultaneously in the same location, there seemed to be nothing else in common between this music and the film. The film was number one, it was a really bad film, and it was trying so hard to be like a serious, dark art film that it completely blew past the line and ended up well in the realm of parody. I mean, any weird, surrealistic thing that you can imagine being in some lousy wannabe art house film, or someone trying to make fun of an art house film, this film had. It was all in slow motion, and not like the good kind of slow motion. I'm talking about the kind of slow motion where you film the thing using a regular camera on regular speed, and then you ask iMovie to slow it down 40%. So it's just this choppy nonsense. And it was that way almost the whole film. It was just awful. And it had nothing to do with the music whatsoever. So what could have been a really cool experience of kind of this reversal marriage of music and film, where instead of having someone score a film that exists, taking an existing piece of music and crafting a film around it, which as a composer, I think would be a fantastic project. I would love to work on something like that. This was a complete disaster. It was just so remarkably bad.
Well, I think I had a better time this weekend than you did.
I think you did. I highly encourage our viewers to check out Messiaen's From the Canyon to the Stars. Lots of cool instrumental things, lots of really interesting, kind of mid-century modernistic type of things. Just please don't go see it with this film, because if you don't if I didn't already like Messiaen's music going in, I would have left that performance thinking that I just absolutely hated Messiaen's music, even though none of it was his fault.
All right. Well, on that note.
Yeah. So enjoy.
I think that'll wrap it up. This is a brief week for us, or a brief episode. And what we wanted to go out on this time was a little bit of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy score by Alberto Iglesias, since we hadn't talked about him or Dave. Everything okay there?
It sounds something like that.
That's right. That's a little sneak preview of the preview. So anyway, we will tail out with a little bit of the Alberto Iglesias score. This would be an excerpt from the track George Smiley. So that will do it for this episode of Streamers and Putches. You can listen to us on soundnotion.tv/SAP, where you can also subscribe to our show, leave comments, and find links to the music we spoke about. Also, check us out through iTunes, where you can subscribe to our show there. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.